My colleague always forces everyone to do things her way. My name is Ethan Parker. She controlled every meeting, every project, and made sure everyone knew it was her way or no way. Trust me, you'll regret skipping the story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Ethan's Way. Now get in the mood to listen to this story because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. When Lisa joined our team, I thought she was just another ambitious professional eager to prove herself. She was smart, well-spoken, and had a confidence that immediately filled the room. At first, her energy felt like a breath of fresh air. She volunteered to take the lead on our new project, promising to streamline processes and improve results. But it didn't take long for her true colors to show. Lisa had a way of commanding attention that left little room for anyone else's voice. In meetings, she would interrupt colleagues mid-sentence, dismiss alternative ideas with a casual wave, and insist that her approach was the only path to success. It wasn't just leadership, it was control. At first I thought maybe we just needed to adjust to her style. After all, every team has a dominant personality. But soon it became clear this was more than dominance, it was manipulation. Lisa began subtly undermining our contributions. She'd present our ideas as if they were hers, conveniently forgetting to mention who actually came up with them. She'd reassign tasks without consulting the team, burdening some while sparing others. Collaboration gave way to compliance. The atmosphere shifted. Our team, once buzzing with shared enthusiasm, became a place of tension and unspoken frustration. Whispers of discontent floated around the office, but fear and uncertainty kept most from speaking up. Nobody wanted to be the next target. Lisa's demands extended beyond the office. She expected us to work late hours, often calling or messaging at odd times to check in or clarify tasks. She leaned on personal favors, someone to pick up her dry cleaning, others to cover shifts last minute. It wasn't part of her job description, but she acted like it was mandatory. Resentment simmered beneath smiles and nods. I found myself calculating how to avoid her requests without seeming rude. But the truth was, we were trapped in her orbit. The breaking point came during a critical presentation. I had spent weeks preparing my segment, researching data, and crafting clear arguments. When the day arrived, Lisa interrupted me, repeatedly cutting down my points and redirecting the narrative to focus on her contributions. I felt invisible, sidelined, and disrespected. Inside, I wanted to explode. But I swallowed the rage and sat through the rest of the presentation, voice-clipped emotions simmering. Afterward, I tried to find allies, quietly discussing my concerns with colleagues. But many were either too intimidated by Lisa's reputation or had grown complicit, playing along to stay on her good side. It was lonely and frustrating. I realized I needed to confront her myself. Summoning every ounce of courage, I arranged a private conversation. I told her how her behavior was affecting me and the team, asking for more respect and openness to others' ideas. Lisa smiled cold and dismissive and warned me that things didn't work that way here. Her words felt like a challenge. Soon after, the backlash began. Invitations to meetings stopped coming. Email threads excluded me. Rumors surfaced, painting me as difficult and uncooperative. It was a clear message: push back and you lose. But I wasn't ready to back down. I began documenting everything: emails, messages, instances of her overreach and manipulation. I knew I had to be strategic. This was bigger than personal conflict. It was about workplace fairness and respect. When I presented the evidence to HR, the company launched an investigation. The atmosphere at work shifted, tension rose, alliances broke, and the facade Lisa had maintained began to crack. Eventually, Lisa faced consequences. She was removed from leadership roles and placed under supervision. The team breathed a collective sigh of relief, but the damage to trust, morale, and relationships lingered. Looking back, this experience taught me the importance of standing up for oneself and others even when it feels risky. It showed me that power can be wielded destructively, but truth and courage can restore balance. If you were in this situation, would you forgive or take revenge? Comment below to let us know. The air in the office was thick with unspoken frustration. After Lisa's takeover of our projects and meetings, a subtle but pervasive tension settled in. It wasn't just her blunt demands, it was the way she rewrote every idea to fit her narrative, how she'd take credit for the smallest contributions as if they were her own genius. I watched as talented coworkers withdrew, silenced by her subtle undermining. The vibrant team spirit we once had was replaced by guarded conversations and cautious nods. People feared speaking up, worried they'd be dismissed or worse, targeted. Lisa's tactics weren't overt, but they were effective. She'd praise someone's work in a meeting, then suggest a better way behind their backs. She sowed doubt about others' competence while inflating her own importance. Over time, she built a fortress of control that left us all on edge. I tried to maintain professionalism, hoping that focusing on my work and staying out of conflicts would protect me. But Lisa wasn't just a bossy colleague, she was a manipulator who wanted dominance. When I suggested an alternative approach in a strategy meeting, she cut me off coldly. "You don't understand the bigger picture," she said sharply. "This is my project. We do it my way." The room fell silent. Eyes flickered nervously between us. I felt the sting of humiliation, but kept my voice steady. "I think collaboration means considering all perspectives." She shot me a look that made it clear I'd crossed a line. Lisa's control extended beyond work. She demanded favors, last-minute help with deadlines, personal errands during office hours, and even unspoken expectations of loyalty. The line between professional and personal blurred until it was nearly non-existent. When I hesitated to cover for her on a Friday evening, she gave me a pointed glare. "Teamwork means sacrifice," she said. I wanted to say no. I wanted to push back, but I was drained, afraid of rocking the boat. As the weeks passed, the tension became unbearable. Conversations were laced with sarcasm and thinly veiled resentment. The once close-knit group was fragmented by fear and frustration. I started to dread work, waking each morning with a knot in my stomach. Yet no one spoke openly. Lisa's reign was unchallenged, her power unquestioned. One afternoon, I confided in a trusted colleague, hoping to find an ally. She nodded knowingly. "She's tough," she said quietly, "but she's afraid of losing control. If we all stood up, she'd fall." It was a small spark of hope. Maybe we could reclaim the team. Still, I knew something had to change. The atmosphere in the office was shifting, but not in a way anyone wanted to admit out loud. Lisa's dominance had started to suffocate the team's spirit, turning collaboration into silent compliance. I remember the day of our big project presentation like it was yesterday. We had poured weeks into preparing every slide, every argument, every data point. I had spent countless late nights perfecting my section, ensuring that my analysis was sharp and persuasive. I was ready, but the moment Lisa took the floor, all that preparation felt like dust. She commanded the room with a force that brooked no opposition. When I began to present my findings, she cut me off sharply. "That's not relevant," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Let's focus on what actually moves the needle." The sting of being silenced was immediate and deep. I tried to push back gently to explain the importance of the data, but she shot me a look that froze me in place. "Let's not get bogged down in details that don't matter," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. The room was silent, colleagues exchanging glances but unwilling to intervene. The message was clear: challenge Lisa and you lose your voice. I left that meeting feeling invisible, unvalued, and powerless. The confidence I had built crumbled under the weight of her control. The team's dynamic was fractured, but no one dared speak up. Lisa's quiet tyranny had created a culture of fear disguised as efficiency. After that day, the atmosphere grew even more toxic. Lisa's subtle manipulations intensified. She would compliment the team members' work publicly, only to undermine it privately. She took credit for ideas that weren't hers and strategically reassigned tasks to pit colleagues against one another. It was a game of control, and she played it flawlessly. I noticed how once enthusiastic coworkers became withdrawn, their creativity stifled. The energy that had fueled our projects was replaced by tension and distrust. Everyone seemed to be walking on eggshells, afraid to voice opinions or challenge Lisa's decisions. The team I had once felt proud to be part of was dissolving before my eyes. Her demands extended beyond the office hours. Text messages late into the night, urgent requests for help on trivial tasks, and expectations of personal favors became the norm. One evening, Lisa called me after 8 p.m. asking me to review a few quick edits with a tone that left no room for refusal. When I hesitated, she reminded me, "We're a team, we all have to make sacrifices." It felt less like teamwork and more like coercion. The boundaries between professional respect and personal obligation blurred, leaving me drained and resentful. I wondered how many others felt the same, but stayed silent, trapped by fear of retaliation. In a quiet moment, I confided in a trusted colleague during lunch. Her eyes reflected the same exhaustion I felt. "She's brilliant at control," she whispered. "She makes you doubt yourself and each other. We're all too scared to push back because we don't know what will happen next. That conversation was a spark in the dark. Maybe we weren't alone. Maybe the power she wielded wasn't invincible. Encouraged, I began to test the waters. I spoke up in meetings, more firmly insisted on sharing my ideas, and called out when Lisa dismissed others unfairly. But each time the backlash was swift. Invitations to meetings ceased, emails stopped, including me, and subtle rumors about my attitude began to circulate. One day, I overheard a colleague say Ethan's difficult to work with, doesn't fit the culture here. It wasn't just professional ostracism, it was a campaign to silence dissent and isolate me. But giving up was not an option. I began meticulously documenting incidents, email threads where I was excluded, meeting notes showing Lisa's overreach, examples of her undermining behavior. I wanted to build a case not just for myself, but for the team. With this evidence, I approached HR. The conversation was tense. I knew such complaints could backfire, but I spoke clearly about how Lisa's actions were affecting productivity and morale. HR assured me they would investigate. The investigation shifted the workplace atmosphere dramatically. Lisa's composure cracked under scrutiny and whispers turned into open discussions. People felt emboldened to share their experiences. For the first time in months, the team breathed. Looking back, this experience reshaped me. It taught me that silence is complicity and that courage to speak up can dismantle even the most entrenched power. It reminded me that respect and fairness are non-negotiable in any workplace. If you were in this situation, would you forgive or take revenge? Comment below to let us know. After the investigation began, the tension in the office was almost unbearable. It was as if a long-held secret had been pried open, exposing raw nerves and old wounds. Lisa, once untouchable, now seemed vulnerable, but she didn't give up without a fight. In meetings, her tone sharpened. Her usual calm, commanding presence shifted to something colder, more defensive. She would shoot pointed glances at those she suspected had turned against her. The team, sensing the change, walked even more cautiously. Despite the atmosphere, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The slow tide was turning. People who had been silent started to speak in hushed tones, sharing their stories. The solidarity was fragile, but it was growing. Lisa's backlash intensified. She began excluding me from important projects and meetings, undercutting my responsibilities. I was given menial tasks unrelated to my role, a clear message: fall in line or be sidelined. Rumors about my attitude problems circulated. I was branded difficult and uncooperative. The damage wasn't just professional, it was personal, but I refused to be broken. One day, during a one-on-one with HR, I presented my collected evidence. Emails showing her micromanagement, witness statements from colleagues who felt intimidated, documentation of exclusion from meetings. It was thorough, a record of toxic leadership. HR promised to take action, but warned change wouldn't be immediate. The company culture, they said, was complicated and Lisa had powerful allies. Meanwhile, Lisa seemed to sense her grip loosening. Her attempts to manipulate conversations became more overt. She would deflect blame, accuse others of sabotage, and demand loyalty. It was exhausting to witness, yet the team began reclaiming its voice. Meetings became more collaborative. Ideas flowed more freely. A tentative trust was rebuilding. Personally, I found new strength. I stopped second-guessing myself, recognizing that my concerns were valid. I sought support outside work, rebuilding my confidence and resilience. The ordeal taught me about boundaries, self-respect, and the power of collective courage. Lisa eventually faced formal warnings and was removed from leadership roles. The process was messy, fraught with tension and uncertainty, but it sent a message: toxic control would not be tolerated. Despite the progress, the scars remained. The team was healing but fragile. Trust once broken takes time to restore. In quiet moments, I reflected on the lessons learned. Standing up wasn't easy and the cost was high, but the alternative, silence and complicity, was far worse. If you were in this situation, would you forgive or take revenge? Comment below to share your thoughts. The office was different now, but not entirely free. The day Lisa was officially removed from her leadership role felt like the turning of a tide, a long-awaited shift that many of us hoped would bring relief. But what followed wasn't immediate peace. It was the slow, painful process of rebuilding something that had been fractured for far too long. After Lisa's fall, the tension in the air thickened, not with fear, but with uncertainty. The team was like a house shaken by an earthquake. Walls, cracked foundations weakened, and no clear idea how to put the pieces back together. People whispered in corners, unsure what could be trusted or what the future held. For me, the relief was immediate, but accompanied by exhaustion deeper than I had anticipated. I had spent months fighting a silent battle, walking a tightrope between confrontation and self-preservation. Now, as the dust settled, I felt the weight of every sleepless night, every avoided conversation, every suppressed frustration pressing down. The silence was almost deafening. Lisa's absence left a void that was both freeing and disorienting. No longer overshadowed by her dominating presence, the team had to relearn how to communicate, collaborate, and trust. But scars ran deep. The unspoken resentment and wariness lingered like a fog. I saw it in the hesitant glances during meetings and the cautious tone when new ideas were shared. The vibrant collaborative energy that once defined us was replaced by tentative steps forward. It was clear that healing was going to require patience and intention. Recognizing this, I began to take on a different role, not as the leader who wielded authority, but as the bridge, someone who listened without judgment and encouraged openness. I made an effort to speak with my colleagues one-on-one to hear their stories and fears and to validate their experiences. It wasn't always easy. Some were still guarded, unsure if trusting again was safe. Building that trust meant being vulnerable myself. I shared my own struggles, the moments when I felt invisible or sidelined, and the internal battle between standing up and staying silent. I showed that admitting weakness wasn't failure, but a step toward connection. Slowly, small changes emerged. Meetings became more inclusive. Voices that had been muffled started to rise. The atmosphere, while still fragile, began to feel less suffocating. But change was not without resistance. Lisa remained in the company, though stripped of power. Her presence was a constant reminder of the control she once wielded as shadow, lurking at the edges of our new beginning. Rumors circulated that she was plotting to regain influence, whispering discontent to anyone who would listen. One afternoon, our paths crossed unexpectedly in the break room. The air was thick with tension. She looked at me with a cold, almost mocking smile. "I see you're still here," she said, voice low and cutting. I met her gaze steadily. "I am, and I'm here to do my job." There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the pain she caused, just the same ruthless ambition I had battled. That encounter crystallized for me that this wasn't just a professional conflict, it was a personal challenge. Lisa's behavior reflected deep insecurities and a hunger for control, but also a refusal to change. The scars she left behind weren't easily healed by her removal. I realized then that lasting change required more than just one person's departure. It demanded a cultural shift, a re-examination of our values, policies, and how we supported each other. I started advocating for clearer workplace guidelines around respect and communication. I encouraged leadership to create channels where employees could safely voice concerns without fear of retaliation. Workshops on collaboration and conflict resolution were proposed. Slowly, the company began to acknowledge the need for systemic change. On a personal level, I grew in ways I hadn't expected. The ordeal taught me to trust my instincts, to value my voice, and to recognize the importance of boundaries. I learned that standing up is not a sign of conflict, but of courage and self-respect. I also discovered the power of solidarity. The slow rebuilding of trust among my colleagues showed me that collective strength can overcome even the most entrenched toxicity. But the road ahead remained long. Not all wounds had healed. Some colleagues remained wary, reluctant to fully engage. Lisa's lingering presence cast occasional shadows over meetings and decisions. Healing, I realized, isn't a destination, but a continuous journey. Reflecting on all this, I wondered, what would I have done differently if given the chance? Could I have spoken up sooner? Was there a way to break the cycle of fear before it took root? If you were in my position, what would you have done? Would you fight or walk away? Would you forgive or seek justice? I invite you to share your thoughts and experiences below. The story isn't just about one colleague's need to control or one team's struggle. It's about the complexities of workplace dynamics, the cost of silence, and the transformative power of courage and community. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Ethan's Way for more real, raw narratives about the battles we face and the victories we earn. The atmosphere in the office was thick with unspoken tension, but beneath it lay a current of cautious hope. Lisa's overt control had been challenged, and while her influence still lingered like a shadow, the team began to slowly reclaim their voices. But change, as I was learning, was not instant. It was a slow, uneven climb riddled with setbacks, doubts, and moments of fragility. For me, this period was transformative but grueling. I wasn't just fighting against Lisa anymore. I was confronting my own fears, insecurities, and the scars left by months of suppression. The experience had peeled back layers I hadn't realized I carried, layers of self-doubt, learned helplessness, and the complex interplay between ambition and vulnerability. In the early days after HR's intervention, I noticed the subtle shifts in how people interacted. Meetings that were once dominated by a single voice started to include quiet contributions from those who had previously withdrawn. Ideas flowed more freely, though often tentative, as if the team was testing the waters of this newfound openness. One afternoon, I sat across from Jenna, a colleague who had been particularly reserved during Lisa's reign. She confessed that she had feared repercussions if she spoke up, but seeing someone else take a stand gave her courage. "I was tired of feeling invisible," she said softly. "It's like Lisa's shadow was in every room. Now I feel like I can breathe again." Her words struck a chord. The workplace toxicity had been more than just about control. It had been about erasing our identities. To help nurture this fragile resurgence of collaboration, I began organizing informal gatherings, lunches, coffee breaks, and after-work meetups. These weren't just social events, they were safe spaces where we could share our frustrations, support each other, and rebuild trust outside the formal structures of the office. At one such gathering, I spoke candidly about my own struggles during the ordeal. I shared the moments I had doubted myself, the fear of retaliation, and the exhaustion of being sidelined. To my surprise, many others opened up, revealing their own hidden battles. It became clear that the toxic dynamic wasn't just about Lisa, it was about a culture of silence and fear that had allowed her to thrive. Recognizing this, I approached management with proposals for systemic change. I advocated for clearer policies on workplace behavior, anonymous reporting channels, and training programs on communication and conflict resolution. While the initial response was cautious, the momentum was growing. Senior leaders acknowledged the need for change spurred by HR's investigation and the palpable unrest within the team. Meanwhile, Lisa's response to losing her authority was subtle but unmistakable. She began to isolate herself, retreating from group activities and avoiding direct confrontation. Her presence in the office was marked by cold professionalism, a stark contrast to the warmth and engagement she had once feigned. There were rumors of her dissatisfaction and whispers that she was looking for opportunities elsewhere. But despite the distance she created, the psychological scars she left behind remained. During this time, I found myself reflecting deeply on leadership and power. Lisa's control had been rooted in fear, fear of losing status, fear of being seen as inadequate. Her tactics were brutal, but beneath them was a vulnerability she refused to show. It reminded me that toxic leadership is often a mask for deeper wounds, and that true leadership requires empathy, humility, and the courage to share power rather than hoard it. As the team slowly healed, I also focused on my own growth. I sought mentorship and professional development to strengthen my skills and confidence. I worked on assertiveness, learning to express my ideas clearly without aggression. I built alliances based on mutual respect rather than fear. The journey was challenging but rewarding. I was becoming not just a better colleague, but a better version of myself. However, healing was never linear. There were days when old tensions flared, when colleagues slipped back into silence, or when doubts crept in. The fragility of progress was a constant reminder that vigilance was necessary. One particularly difficult day, a meeting derailed into blame and recrimination, threatening to undo months of work. But instead of retreating, I stepped forward to mediate, reminding everyone of our shared goals and the importance of mutual respect. That moment marked a turning point, a testament to how far we had come. Outside of work, I found solace in my personal life. Friends and family provided support and perspective, reminding me that my worth wasn't defined by workplace battles. I reconnected with hobbies and interests that I had neglected, rediscovering joy in small things. This balance was essential. The ordeal had shown me the dangers of letting work consume one's identity. Looking back, the experience with Lisa was a crucible, painful but transformative. It taught me that standing up to toxicity requires not just courage, but strategy, patience, and resilience. It reminded me that leadership is about lifting others up, not pushing them down. I also learned the power of community. Alone, the battle might have broken me, but with allies, mentors, and a team willing to heal, change was possible. If you face a similar situation, a colleague who controls and manipulates, know that you're not alone. Speak up, build alliances, and remember that your voice matters. Would you forgive Lisa? Would you seek revenge? Or would you walk away? Share your thoughts below. I knew confronting Lisa wasn't going to be easy. It was the moment I had both dreaded and silently prepared for over months, the moment where I had to stop circling around the issue and stare it down head first. The air was thick that morning as I walked to the conference room where we'd agreed to meet. My heart was pounding, not just from nerves, but from a fierce determination. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the whole team, the toxic atmosphere, the stifled voices, the stolen opportunities for collaboration. If I didn't say something, who would? Lisa was already there, sitting with that same confident posture she always had, shoulders back, eyes sharp, a slight smirk playing at the corners of her mouth, as if she already knew this conversation was hers to win. I cleared my throat and took a seat across from her. For a brief moment, I thought about walking out, but I forced myself to stay. I wanted to talk about how things have been going. I began keeping my voice calm, with the team, with the projects, and with our collaboration. Lisa's smirk didn't fade. "Go on," she said, folding her hands in front of her. I steadied myself and laid it out clearly. "I feel that your leadership style has been frankly controlling. It's creating an environment where people are afraid to share ideas or challenge decisions. I've noticed my own contributions being dismissed or overridden without proper discussion." She leaned forward slightly, a flicker of impatience crossing her face. "Ethan, leadership means making tough decisions. It's not about everyone getting a say or being comfortable. It's about getting results." Her tone was clipped dismissive. I took a breath. "I'm not questioning your authority to lead," I said carefully, "but leadership should inspire collaboration, not fear. When ideas are shut down without consideration, or when conversations are manipulated to favor one perspective, the whole team suffers." Lisa's eyes narrowed. "This isn't idealism, Ethan. This is business. If you want to be part of the team, you'll adapt." Her words hit hard, but I refused to back down. "Adaptation doesn't mean surrendering your voice or integrity," I said firmly. "It means respect, and respect means listening to others, valuing their input." For a moment, silence hung between us. Then she smiled, cold and sharp. "You think you're special, that your voice matters more than the project. That's arrogance." The insult was meant to cut, but it steeled my resolve. "No, I think collaboration makes a project stronger. I think respect builds trust, and trust builds results." Lisa's smile didn't falter. "Your naivety will be your downfall." That meeting marked a turning point. Lisa's retaliation was immediate. I was excluded from meetings I normally led or participated in. Tasks beneath my level were assigned to me. Emails were sent without my name. Subtle digs and whispers followed. One colleague, usually warm and friendly, now barely acknowledged me in the hallway. Another stopped responding to my messages. The isolation was crushing, but I wasn't alone. I quietly reached out to coworkers who had suffered under Lisa's control. Many had felt powerless, afraid of speaking up, but my confrontation had inspired a few to share their own experiences. We began documenting instances of exclusion, manipulation, and harassment. Together we built a dossier of evidence. HR took notice. The investigation was slow, tense, and uncomfortable. Lisa fought back, accusing me and others of insubordination and divisiveness, but the truth was becoming undeniable. Throughout it all, I leaned heavily on friends and mentors outside work. Their support kept me grounded when doubt and fear threatened to overwhelm me. I learned the value of self-care and resilience. I learned to separate my self-worth from the turmoil at work. The investigation eventually led to consequences for Lisa. She was removed from her leadership position and placed under supervision. The victory was bittersweet. The team was fractured, trust broken. I realized the experience was about more than a difficult colleague. It was about power dynamics, workplace culture, and the courage to stand up for fairness. If you faced a colleague like Lisa, how would you respond? Would you confront her head on or avoid conflict? Would you forgive or seek justice? Share your thoughts below. The moment I confronted Lisa, I knew the battle had only just begun. What followed wasn't an open war, but a silent, corrosive campaign designed to isolate and discredit me. The professional battlefield morphed into a psychological minefield every day, a careful dance of avoiding traps, reading between lines, and guarding my own sanity. At first, the exclusion was subtle. Invitations to meetings I used to lead quietly stopped coming. Email threads about critical projects continued without me. Decisions were made behind closed doors, and my suggestions were brushed aside with polite nods but no follow-through. It was a slow erasure, the kind that chips away at your confidence and sense of belonging. Lisa's ability to control narratives and manipulate perceptions was terrifyingly effective. She crafted a version of reality where dissenters were difficult, uncooperative, or even disloyal. Whispered rumors began circulating, painting me as problematic and disruptive. Colleagues I once considered allies hesitated to associate, openly wary of becoming targets themselves. One day, I overheard a hushed conversation in the break room where my professionalism was questioned based purely on Lisa's insinuations. The sting of betrayal was sharp, but it also fueled my resolve. I realized that silence or retreat would only empower the toxicity. I needed to fight back strategically and methodically. I began meticulously documenting every instance of exclusion, unfair treatment, and subtle sabotage. Every ignored email, every meeting I wasn't invited to, every altered task assignment was recorded with dates and details. I started collecting witness statements from colleagues who had experienced or observed Lisa's manipulations. Together we created a dossier, not just a complaint, but a map of the damage inflicted. This process was emotionally taxing. It forced me to relive moments of hurt and humiliation, to confront my vulnerabilities head-on. Yet it was also empowering. For the first time in months, I felt a measure of control returning to my hands. While preparing for a formal complaint, I sought counsel from trusted mentors outside the company. Their guidance was invaluable, reminding me to remain factual, avoid emotional traps, and maintain professionalism even under pressure. They helped me see the bigger picture. This wasn't just about me, but about creating a healthier workplace for everyone. HR's involvement became more serious once the dossier was submitted. Investigators interviewed multiple employees, reviewed communications, and observed team dynamics closely. Lisa's carefully curated image began to unravel under scrutiny. But the investigation was no magic bullet. It introduced a new layer of tension and uncertainty. The workplace became a pressure cooker of whispered conversations, shifting alliances, and simmering anxieties. Some colleagues were emboldened to speak up, while others retreated further into silence. Through it all, Lisa's tactics evolved. Sensing her grip slipping, she resorted to more overt forms of retaliation, sending passive-aggressive emails undermining my contributions publicly and attempting to turn colleagues against me. It was exhausting to navigate her games, especially as the company grappled with how to respond effectively. Despite the pressure, I refused to be broken. I reminded myself daily why I had chosen to stand up not just for my own dignity, but for the team's future. I leaned on my support network, friends, family, and mentors, who provided perspective and strength when I faltered. The situation also pushed me to develop new skills: conflict resolution, emotional regulation, and strategic communication. I learned how to assert boundaries firmly yet respectfully, to engage in difficult conversations without escalating conflict. After months of investigation and internal discussion, the company took decisive action. Lisa was formally reprimanded and removed from her leadership role. She was reassigned to a position with less direct influence over the team. The immediate relief was palpable. The atmosphere began to lighten and the team cautiously began to heal. But the damage Lisa had done wasn't erased overnight. Trust was fractured. Wounds ran deep. I found myself stepping into a new role, one of a mediator and advocate. I encouraged open dialogue, facilitated team-building exercises, and worked to create an environment where every voice felt valued. The process was slow and often painful, requiring patience and empathy. Reflecting on the ordeal, I realized the experience had changed me profoundly. It taught me the cost of silence and the courage required to speak out. It revealed the complexities of power dynamics in the workplace and the resilience needed to confront them. If you faced a colleague who controls and manipulates like Lisa, how did you respond? Did you find the strength to confront, or did you walk away? What helped you heal and move forward? Please share your experiences and thoughts below. The official investigation marked a watershed moment, but it was only the beginning of a complex and arduous journey to reclaim the team and restore the trust that had been so thoroughly shattered. Lisa's removal from her leadership position was not a clean break. Her shadow lingered in every corner of the office, a reminder of the damage done and the challenges ahead. When the news finally broke that Lisa would be reassigned to another department, the office breathed a collective sigh of relief. But relief was tempered with uncertainty. Change was here, yes, but would it last? The fragile peace that settled over our team felt like the calm after a storm, tense, unsettled, and full of unanswered questions. In the weeks following her removal, the atmosphere at work was tentative and cautious. Meetings that once felt suffocating and one-sided now seemed a bit more open, but the scars left by years of control and manipulation ran deep. I could see it in the way people hesitated to speak up, in the guarded tones and sideways glances. The fear that had been ingrained was not easy to shake. The team I had once known vibrant, creative, and cohesive was fractured. Rebuilding trust felt like trying to reconstruct a shattered mirror, each shard reflecting pain, betrayal, and unspoken hurt. The process was slow and at times painful. Understanding this, I took on a role I hadn't anticipated, that of mediator and advocate. I wasn't the leader, but I tried to be the glue holding us together. I organized informal lunches, coffee breaks, and check-in conversations designed to create safe spaces for dialogue. I encouraged people to share their experiences, frustrations, and hopes without fear of judgment or repercussion. Not everyone was ready to open up. Some colleagues clung to silence as a shield, afraid that speaking out might reopen old wounds or provoke new conflicts. Others were skeptical, unsure whether change was real or just a temporary shift before the old patterns resumed. I knew patience was essential. One moment stands out from this period, a small but profound breakthrough. During a team meeting, someone who had been silent for months tentatively voiced an idea that challenged the conventional approach. Instead of dismissal or derision, the room responded with genuine interest and encouragement. It was a subtle shift, but to me it signaled a reclaiming of our collective voice. However, progress was uneven. There were days when tension flared, old grievances resurfaced, and trust seemed to unravel. The legacy of Lisa's control was not something that could be erased overnight. Healing required consistent effort, empathy, and a willingness to confront discomfort. During this time, I focused intensely on my own growth. The experience with Lisa had been a harsh teacher, forcing me to examine not only workplace dynamics, but my own responses and boundaries. I sought mentorship, professional development, and training in emotional intelligence, conflict resolution, and inclusive leadership. I learned to listen more deeply, to communicate assertively yet compassionately, and to build alliances based on respect rather than fear. This wasn't just about surviving a toxic colleague. It was about becoming the kind of leader who could foster a positive, collaborative environment. Outside of work, I prioritized rebuilding balance in my life. The stress and isolation had taken their toll, and reconnecting with friends, family, and personal interests was vital. These anchors reminded me that my identity and worth extended far beyond the office. Healing also required forgiveness, not of Lisa's actions, which were unforgivable, but a forgiveness of the emotional hold her behavior had on me. Letting go of bitterness and resentment was a gift I gave myself, freeing me to move forward without being weighed down. Reflecting on the entire ordeal, I realized it was more than a story of conflict and power. It was a story of resilience, courage, and the transformative potential of community. It taught me that standing up is difficult but necessary, that change requires time and patience, and that leadership is ultimately about empathy and empowerment. If you face similar challenges, a colleague who dominated and manipulated, how did you find the strength to reclaim your voice? How did your team heal? Share your experiences and insights below. Your story could help someone else find theirs. The days after Lisa's removal from leadership were filled with a mix of relief and uncertainty. The oppressive weight that had hung over our team for so long was finally lifting, yet the path ahead was anything but clear. The wounds left by months, even years of control and manipulation, didn't simply vanish with her absence. Instead, they surfaced in unexpected ways, in hesitant conversations, awkward silences, and moments of doubt. Rebuilding trust was not a task with a finish line. It was a continuous, often painful journey. I quickly realized that while Lisa was gone from her position, the cultural damage she inflicted remained embedded in the fabric of our daily work life. The challenge was to nurture new patterns of respect and collaboration, while addressing the lingering effects of fear and mistrust. One of the first things I did was step up not as a formal leader, but as a facilitator of healing. I began organizing small gatherings where team members could share their feelings and experiences openly. These were informal, unstructured meetings held over lunch or coffee breaks designed to create safe spaces free from judgment or reprisal. During one such meeting, I invited everyone to talk about what had been hardest during Lisa's tenure and what they hoped to see change. The room was heavy with emotion. Some shared stories of being silenced or marginalized. Others spoke of the exhaustion of constantly managing the unspoken rules of control. There were tears, nods of understanding, and moments of profound vulnerability. Listening to these stories was both heart-wrenching and enlightening. It became clear that healing wasn't just about addressing Lisa's actions, but about acknowledging the deep-seated impact on individual psyches and relationships. The pain of feeling invisible or powerless can leave lasting scars, and those scars needed care. As a team, we began crafting a vision for a healthier workplace culture, one grounded in respect, empathy, and open communication. We discussed concrete steps, regular check-ins, transparent decision-making processes, and clear channels for feedback and concerns. Meanwhile, I continued my own journey of growth. The experience had challenged me to reevaluate what it meant to be a leader. I dove into books, courses, and mentorships focusing on emotional intelligence, conflict resolution, and inclusive leadership. I wanted to ensure that I wouldn't just survive this ordeal, but emerge equipped to foster environments where everyone could thrive. I learned that true leadership is less about authority and more about service, about empowering others rather than controlling them. This was a stark contrast to the toxic dynamic Lisa had created, and I was determined to be part of the solution. But progress wasn't always linear. There were days when old fears and resentments resurfaced. Colleagues who had once rallied together would slip back into silence or withdraw. Tensions occasionally flared over lingering misunderstandings. Healing required patience, humility, and a willingness to confront discomfort head-on. One particularly challenging moment occurred during a project meeting when a heated debate erupted between two team members who had clashed under Lisa's reign. Voices were raised, emotions raw. It was a stark reminder that the past could not be erased overnight. In that moment, I stepped forward to mediate, drawing on the skills I had been cultivating. I encouraged active listening and reminded everyone of our shared goals and commitment to respect. Slowly, the room calmed and we moved forward, not without scars, but with renewed determination. Outside the office, I prioritized balance. The toll of months of conflict and stress had been heavy. I reconnected with friends and family, rekindled hobbies, and practiced self-care. These anchors were essential in maintaining my resilience and perspective. One of the most powerful lessons I learned was the importance of forgiveness, not in excusing harmful behavior, but in releasing the grip of bitterness and pain. I worked to forgive Lisa for the damage she caused, understanding that holding on to resentment would only hold me back. The company also began instituting broader cultural changes inspired in part by the turmoil our team endured. New policies on workplace behavior, clearer reporting mechanisms, and training programs were introduced. While no policy can guarantee perfect harmony, these steps signaled a commitment to fostering healthier environments. Reflecting on the entire journey, I saw it as more than a personal or professional struggle. It was a profound lesson in courage, resilience, and the power of community. It showed me that change requires vulnerability and the willingness to lead with empathy. If you faced similar workplace challenges, how did you rebuild trust and find balance? What lessons did you learn about leadership and resilience? Please share your stories and insights below. The months that followed, Lisa's slow withdrawal from our team's daily dynamics were not defined by sudden relief or instant clarity. They were instead shaped by a quiet, often imperceptible evolution, a rebuilding of structures that had been warped, a careful piecing back together of the trust that had cracked in so many places. It wasn't just the workflows or the project pipelines that needed attention. It was us, the people, the relationships, the unspoken dynamics, the emotional aftershocks that demanded healing. In the immediate aftermath, there was a strange silence in the air. Meetings that used to be dominated by tension and a palpable sense of fear were now quieter, almost eerily so. No one quite knew how to fill the space Lisa had left behind, not just in terms of tasks, but in the energy she had consumed, the wariness she had instilled. Her presence had demanded constant vigilance. Her absence demanded something else entirely: honesty. I remember sitting at my desk a week after she'd stopped coming to meetings. A spreadsheet glowed on my monitor, but my mind wandered, fixating not on numbers or deadlines, but on something more intangible. What exactly had allowed things to get that bad? Lisa hadn't simply imposed herself upon us. We had allowed it. We had enabled it, even if passively. Through our silence, our hesitation, our unwillingness to confront the discomfort early on, we had handed over the keys. That realization didn't come all at once. It dawned in fragments. A memory here, a conversation there, a subtle pattern I hadn't noticed before. And with it came a sense of accountability. Not blame, but ownership. I couldn't control how Lisa had behaved, but I could reflect on what I had tolerated, what I had normalized. That became the starting point of change. Not outrage, not revenge, but introspection. It was then that I began to understand something deeper about power and control. Lisa's dominance hadn't come from strength. It came from fear, hers and ours. She clung to control because she feared inadequacy. We deferred because we feared conflict. And in that quiet contract of mutual fear, dysfunction thrived. But if fear could build that kind of structure, then surely courage could dismantle it. So I began making intentional choices, small ones at first. I started holding weekly check-ins, informal but consistent with team members. Not performance reviews, just conversations, safe spaces. I made it clear that these meetings were not about reporting or accountability metrics. They were about connection, about surfacing the things we all too often buried in favor of artificial harmony. At first, people were cautious, guarded. Some offered polite observations, others little more than smiles. But gradually, as the weeks went on, those meetings began to shift. Real issues came up, small frictions between teammates, confusion over task ownership, anxieties about remote work and isolation. And with every honest conversation, a thread of trust was rewoven, slowly, deliberately, almost invisibly. Parallel to that, I worked on myself. I made the uncomfortable choice to stop pretending I had all the answers. I admitted out loud and in writing when I was uncertain. I asked questions I used to avoid. I invited feedback not just on projects but on my behavior, my communication, my assumptions. Vulnerability, I found, was not weakness. It was an invitation, an opening for others to do the same. It changed everything. One moment I'll never forget was during a project debrief. We had just wrapped up a major campaign that had gone better than expected, and I asked everyone to share, not just what had worked, but what had felt hard. One of my colleagues, a quiet, brilliant designer, paused and said, "Honestly, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was bracing myself every day. That made all the difference." That sentence landed like a weight in my chest, not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. The emotional labor of bracing, of living in that constant low-level alert mode, had become so normalized during Lisa's time that we hadn't even noticed it was gone. But we could feel it, in our bones, in our breath. Our team began to change in visible ways. Collaboration improved not because we enforced new protocols, but because we trusted each other again. We didn't just talk about psychological safety, we lived it. Disagreements became more productive. Innovation returned not because we scheduled brainstorming sessions, but because people felt safe enough to speak freely. But I won't pretend it was all smooth from that point forward. Healing is never linear. There were relapses, moments when old habits resurfaced, a passive-aggressive email, a missed opportunity to address a problem head-on, whispers of mistrust during stressful crunch periods. But this time, we had a framework, a culture that didn't allow those moments to metastasize. We named the tensions, we addressed them, and we moved forward. One afternoon, months later, we received the official announcement Lisa had resigned. There was no dramatic send-off, no public acknowledgement of the chaos she had contributed to. Just a short message, a line of HR speak. But in our shared Slack channel, I noticed something strange. Silence. Not celebration, not mockery, just silence. I think in that moment we were all processing something more complex than relief, because as much as we had been hurt, we had also learned. Lisa was a symptom of a larger system, one that allowed unchecked authority to masquerade as leadership. And while it would have been easy to make her the villain in a clean story arc, the truth was more tangled. Some of us, myself included, felt something close to sympathy. Not forgiveness, not excusal, but a recognition of humanity. I don't know what led Lisa to become the way she was. Maybe she had once been undermined herself. Maybe she thought control was the only form of respect. Maybe she was just in over her head. Whatever the reasons, I no longer saw her as a one-dimensional tyrant. I saw her as someone trapped in a role she didn't know how to escape, just as we had been. This doesn't mean the harm she caused was justified, but understanding it allowed us to break the cycle, to learn how not to lead, to rewrite the terms of what we considered strength, success, and professionalism. In the following months, I was promoted into a role I hadn't even pursued. My manager told me, "You've become the person everyone trusts, someone who listens and lifts others up." I thanked her, but I knew the credit belonged not just to me, but to the entire team, to everyone who had chosen honesty over silence, who had stayed when it was easier to check out, who had helped rebuild a broken space into something whole again. Leadership, I've come to understand, is not about commanding the room. It's about holding space for truth, for conflict, for discomfort, for joy. It's about creating an environment where others can lead too in their own ways. There's one final story I want to share. A new hire joined our team, a young analyst fresh out of grad school, eager and sharp, but clearly nervous. I saw myself in him, the way I used to shrink into the background, afraid to say the wrong thing. In one of our early 1-1s, he asked what's something I should know about working here. I thought for a moment. Then I said, "You don't have to pretend here. If you're confused, say it. If you disagree, speak up. We've learned sometimes the hard way that silence can be more dangerous than being wrong." His shoulders relaxed. He smiled. And in that moment, I realized this is what change looks like. Not a sweeping transformation, but a quiet, consistent choice to be better, to be braver, to care. Lisa's shadow no longer loomed, but her legacy unintentionally had shaped us into a stronger, wiser version of ourselves. We had become the culture we wished we'd had. If you're reading this and navigating a toxic workplace or struggling under the weight of a difficult colleague, I want you to hear this clearly. You're not alone. Change is hard but possible. Culture can evolve. Trust can be rebuilt, but it starts with you, with one honest conversation, one courageous act, one refusal to participate in the silence, and most of all, with compassion for others, yes, but especially for yourself. You don't need to fix everything at once. Just take the first step, speak, listen, and build from there. Let this be your reminder. Real leadership doesn't roar, it resonates. The end of this chapter felt both surreal and profound, as if it had emerged from a long and silent battlefield, not just intact, but fundamentally changed. It was more than a simple workplace conflict that had passed. It was a crucible that had reshaped me, my values, my identity, and my capacity to lead. The days after Lisa's final exit from the company were strangely quiet, not triumphant, not bitter, just still. That kind of stillness you feel after a storm has passed, not because all is calm, but because you're finally able to catch your breath. Her absence was palpable at first. The empty seat in meetings, the lack of criticism or passive-aggressive commentary, the awkward pauses where we once braced ourselves for interruption. It was like the air itself had changed, and yet we weren't celebrating, not really. Because when you live under pressure for so long, freedom doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like confusion. It feels like learning how to speak again after too long in silence. And that's exactly what we were doing, relearning how to work with one another, how to trust, how to give feedback without fear, how to speak without scanning the room for disapproval. That process was not fast, and it was not easy, but it was real, tangible. You could feel it in the small ways, how people lingered longer on calls just to talk, how they checked in with each other before diving into work, how the once tense Slack channels were now filled with emojis and inside jokes. It took time, but our team began to feel like a team again. As for me, I did a lot of reflecting during those first weeks after Lisa left. I found myself journaling late at night, sometimes in fragments. Why did I stay silent for so long? What am I afraid of losing when I speak up? Who do I want to be, not just at work, but in life? One night I wrote this. I thought strength meant surviving. Now I know it means transforming. That became my personal mantra. A reminder that resilience isn't about becoming numb to pain. It's about using the pain to grow stronger, wiser, more human, and maybe most importantly, more compassionate. Because what I had experienced wasn't just about Lisa's behavior, it was about all of us. About how fear and ego can quietly erode trust. About how ambition, when left unchecked, turns poisonous. About how easy it is to forget that workplaces are made up of people with hearts, histories, and wounds. And about how healing starts not with policy, but with people. I started taking a more active role in shaping that healing. I led conversations not just about projects, but about values. I invited feedback from team members on how they wanted to work, how they wanted to feel. One colleague admitted, "I used to be afraid of saying the wrong thing around Lisa. Now I am afraid of being too comfortable and missing red flags." That hit me hard, because comfort too can be dangerous when it dulls our awareness. So we made a pact as a team, not in writing but in spirit, to speak up when something didn't feel right, to protect one another from isolation, to remember that kindness is not weakness, that feedback is a gift, that leadership belongs to everyone, not just those with titles, but those who choose to care out loud. I also redefined what leadership meant to me. Before, I thought leadership was about being the loudest voice in the room, the problem solver, the fixer. Now I see it differently. True leadership is about presence. It's about listening, really listening to what people are saying and not saying. It's about creating a space where others can lead in their own way. I started noticing how others began stepping up too. One person offered to mediate a conflict between two team members before it escalated. Another organized a virtual coffee hour just to keep morale up during a hard week. These weren't grand gestures, they were seeds of culture change. And they mattered, because here's what I've learned: transformation is never top-down. It's horizontal. It happens in the in-between moments between one conversation and the next, between the pause and the decision to act. It also helped that we talked openly about what had happened. We didn't pretend that Lisa's behavior hadn't caused harm. We named it. We explored it. We asked ourselves how we had contributed, what we had tolerated, and why. That honesty was painful but liberating. There was no longer a need to pretend everything had been fine. In that truth-telling, we reclaimed something that had been stolen our voices. I remember one team retrospective in particular. Someone said, "I used to feel like speaking up would make me a target. Now I feel like it makes me a contributor." That sentence stuck with me, because that's what we all want deep down, not just to survive work, but to be seen, to be heard, to matter. For a long time, I thought I was just another employee trying to navigate difficult dynamics. But somewhere along the way, I became a steward of change. Not because I was better, not because I had all the answers, but because I cared enough to try. And that's what I want you to take from this, anyone reading or listening to this who has been in a toxic workplace or under the shadow of a controlling colleague. You don't need to be perfect to make a difference. You don't need a title or a plan. You just need a willingness to care, to act, to speak, even when your voice shakes, even when you're scared, especially then. Because the alternative, staying silent, shrinking back, pretending it's fine, is a slow death of spirit. And you deserve more than that. We all do. If there's one lasting lesson from this entire experience, it's this: never underestimate the ripple effect of your courage. I look around now months later and I see a team transformed, not flawless, not drama-free, but real, stronger, more unified, more human. People now speak up in meetings without second-guessing themselves. We disagree, yes, but constructively. We challenge each other's ideas, not each other's worth. We laugh more. We ask about each other's families. We celebrate small wins. We give grace in moments of failure. The culture we once dreamed of is no longer a wish. It's our reality. And yet I remain vigilant, because I know culture is fragile. It must be nurtured, protected, revisited. There will always be new challenges, new personalities, new risks of toxicity. But now we have tools, we have language, we have each other. Lisa's departure may have closed one chapter, but the story continues. In a strange way, I'm even grateful for the experience. Not for the pain, but for the clarity, for the mirror it held up to me, for the reminder that leadership is not about control, it's about care. That strength is not about holding on, it's about letting go of fear, of ego, of silence. And most importantly, that transformation is possible. Always. So to you reading this, whether you're navigating a tense team, dealing with a difficult boss, or simply trying to find your place in a complicated environment, I want you to know you are not alone. Your voice matters, your well-being matters, and your courage, no matter how quiet, can change everything. Start small, ask a question, share a concern, offer support to a colleague who looks like they're carrying too much, challenge the norm when it feels off, and know that each of these acts is a seed, a spark, a beginning. Because every culture is built consciously or not, and you get to choose what you're building. This story, my story, is not just a story about surviving a toxic colleague. It's about reclaiming agency, about rewriting narratives, about saying, I will not be silent in the face of harm. I will not settle for dysfunction. I will stand for myself, for others, for the kind of workplace we all deserve. Thank you for being part of this journey. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of your own struggles or inspired you in any way, I invite you to be part of this growing community. Like, comment below with your own experiences and subscribe to Ethan's Way for more stories. Like this, stories of struggle, courage, redemption, and real-life triumph. Let's keep the conversation going. Let's build better workplaces together. One voice, one choice, one brave act at a time.